Well, Monday we had a program about carbon pricing, and one of the topics that came up time and again was heat pumps. We realized there's a lot of questions you have about heat pumps, so we dedicate today's Blue Sky to that technology. For years, we've heard that heat pumps can't work in Saskatchewan because our winters are so cold, and while they can't be the only source of heat in very frigid temperatures, more people are turning to them for year-round heating and cooling solutions. Today, we're going to hear from some Saskatchewan people who have installed a heat pump in their home, and we'll hear from someone who sells them in Regina, and we'll hear from Efficiency Canada. But as always, we want to hear from you. If you have questions about heat pumps, and you want to talk to someone who has one, or maybe you have experience of your own with a heat pump, or maybe you've looked into them and decided it wasn't for you. Glenn Wright is a farmer from Vanscoy, and he wrote to us about his own experience with heat pumps. So we've invited Glenn to join us today, and he's on the line now. Hi, Glenn.
Hey, Garth, thanks so much for having me here.
Well, thanks for the email, and thanks for taking time for us over the lunch hour. We're going to try to help our listeners out today. How would you describe what a heat pump is?
Well, Garth, the heat pump is actually a fairly commonplace device in most people's homes. So if you've got a refrigerator or if you've got a freezer, you actually already have a heat pump in your house. So heat pumps generally operate on a vapor compression cycle, and so they use a compressor that is run usually with electricity to drive heat from one source to another. And it's the opposite direction that it moves in nature. So naturally, I'm sure most people would recognize that heat, and we measure that with temperature, heat moves from a hot object to a cold object. So at the heat pump, what we're trying to do is actually reverse that. We're putting in energy to drive that transfer of energy in the opposite direction from a cold object to a warm object. So that's what a heat pump does.
Okay, now, Glenn, I don't know. This might be beyond both of us, but this all sounds like magic to me. I don't understand how, it's +1 or +2 degrees outside. How can a heat pump then heat your home to something comfortable like, 2022?
Yeah, Garth, it does sound like magic, and quite often I get accused of heating my house with, unicorn farts and fairy dust, but I'm telling you, it does work. So, and as a child, I also thought it was magical because I didn't mention that the other type of heat pump is an absorption heat pump. And so if you've got an RV and if you've got a fridge and you use propane to cool your food, it's even more magical because you're using a heat source to keep your milk cold. But in my house, the magic works like this. We've got a ground source heat loop. And so what happens is the fluid in that heat loop goes through some wells in our property. And the picture behind me is actually the aerial photo of my farm. So just the area that's kind of treed there in the bottom corner. In a courtyard there that's no bigger than a yard in most, the average urban area like in Regina or Saskatoon, there's 5 wells that have been drilled that are 220 feet deep. And so there is some tubing that goes in there. So the fluid goes into the ground and comes into my house generally around 0 degrees Celsius is kind of the average for the whole year. But as I pump the heat out of that fluid coming into the house, the water leaves the house going out about -5 degrees Celsius. So that's the temperature change in the water that goes in and out of my house. And so that's the magic. We're extracting energy from that water. So for every unit of energy I put in my electrical consumption to run that compressor, I get 3 free units of heat from the ground. So it's magical in that the efficiency of this system is actually closer to 300%. So we've talked a lot about high efficiency gas furnaces moving from, around 75 or 80% up to 90 or 95%. But this is truly magical because we're going from, 100% resistive heating to 300% efficiency. So that's the magic. And the difference with an air source heat pump is instead of using the fluid coming in and out of the house, we're just doing it with air. So at -25, kind of the coldest temperature that we generally see these things operating now, the air is probably coming in at -25, but the air is leaving at slightly lower temperature. So it might be -28 or something like that. So it's obviously harder to extract energy from colder substances, but it is still possible.
What made you want to use a heat pump in your home?
Well, Garth, that's a little bit of a longer story. So if you'd indulge me for a couple minutes, our situation is a little unique. But I grew up in Saskatoon as a motorsports enthusiast. So my local heroes were Bob Pratt and Merle Pratt and Dave and Doug Barr racing machines, and my dad, because these guys knew how to get performance out of engines, and they were real role models for me. But once I learned about climate change, I went through kind of a real identity crisis. I was actually just bereft with grief. And I spent the next year and a half reading material. I probably read 5,000 pages of books and journal articles. And it convinced me that I had to move away from fossil fuels. So the number one reason that my family in our household, we wanted to switch away from our gas heating, we had natural gas on the farm, was because we wanted to stop burning fossil fuels. But the second reason was when you often buy a used property, especially in rural Saskatchewan, sometimes the building inspections haven't been done, and we took a chance. We didn't get our home inspected. But the first 4 years I lived there, the chimney was rotting out, and I replaced the chimney twice, and it was just a death trap for us for carbon monoxide. So when I had somebody come out to look at it, I had to either relocate the furnace or the chimney so that it would be code compliant and not be a risk for carbon monoxide poisoning. So that meant radical changes to the house. And so my quote at the time then was about 10,000 for a new gas furnace and water heater, and then major changes to the house as well. Or I got a quote for a geothermal system that would also give me the benefit of air conditioning. Unfortunately, though, the price was quite high. It was $30,000 was the quote I had. And back then, the best name in town was Dwight's Geothermal to do this kind of work, and he was all booked up. So I took a chance on a contractor that hadn't really been established or proven. And what followed was really just a comedy of errors. And I'm hoping we have time to share those so that people don't have to experience the same mess I went through. But in the end, after we got through that initial teething trouble, it has provided reliable heat for us for the last 15 years. And hasn't necessarily been, I would say, emissions reduction because we have such a dirty power grid in Saskatchewan. But we can certainly see as the grid is going to clean up over time that my emissions from my house will be lower. And we also took it then upon us to install renewable energy on the farm, which was also a bit of a mixed bag because we started with small scale wind and those were a failure, but we've since moved to solar, and that's been really my only regret now with the solar is that I didn't put a bigger system in.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you have a ground source heat pump. You're actually using geothermal. What is the difference between that and the one most people in the cities could get that use air?
So like I said earlier, an air source heat pump is going to extract energy from the outside air. So the outside air coming into the machine is going to be a slightly higher temperature than the air leaving the machine. And then there's a heat exchanger in there that then takes the inside air of the house and runs it through the machine to, again, just pump that energy from the outside air into the inside air. But it's interesting to me that we say that ground source heat pump is not at all an option for urban homes. It's certainly more difficult to get a drilling rig into your property and drill, and you've got a lot more underground services that you have to be aware of. But, my home and what we did is really no different than what, some of the larger lots might be in, say, Montgomery and Saskatoon, or, if you've got a lot that's, say 60 feet wide and 120 feet deep, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's certainly more expensive. And if you don't have access to bring the equipment in, that's probably why you would be looking at an air source pump. But the other thing we should mention, though, is that if you cooperate with others, we're seeing actually other models where people go to district heating. And so from my perspective, and this is really something I would say about the climate change problem in general, our climate change problem is a culture problem, and that's an imagination problem. So for me, I can imagine turning parks that we might have green spaces. There's no reason we couldn't use that area as a source for geothermal ground source loops that could probably heat, dozens of homes in that vicinity if we really chose to. And I think there is a project doing something similar to that in Okotoks, Alberta. They've got some sort of district heating there, but I don't know all of the details. But certainly, I think we're also in a stage where the technology is evolving over time. So it was only a matter of, say, 5 or 10 years ago that air source heat pumps were determined to be not suitable for temperatures below minus 15. But now we're seeing minus 25. So as we change refrigerants and so on and improve the technology, it's getting better and better all the time.
Let's take a couple of minutes then and talk about, because you were an early adopter, Glenn, and you already alluded to the fact that things didn't go as smoothly as they might have. What was that whole installation process like?
Well, Garth, it was August when we were doing the trenching of 2008. And then for whatever reason, my contractor actually, once he had the tubing run into the house, he drug up his materials and left. So all I had was the unit that I had bought in my basement, but none of the piping completed, none of the electrical or the control system completed. So I got very fortunate that I'm a mechanical engineer by training. And so I ended up finishing the project myself. But unfortunately, we didn't actually have heat turned on in our house until November. And the other thing I would say here in terms of lessons learned, I did everything in the wrong order. This is not how anyone should do it at all. And my heroes I mentioned before, when I was drag racing and a motorsports guy, I could turn to them and they'd give me advice. But when I embarked on this path, I felt like I was all alone. And so in the meantime, I've met some very helpful folks like Harold Orr, and he worked with Rob Dumont, I think, and worked on the Energy Conservation House, and then Rob Benadair was the green builder. So what happened was my geothermal system was not undersized, but it was marginal. And it was because my house was such a leaky house and so energy inefficient. I was just bleeding energy everywhere. And even when we moved in, when we were still on natural gas, our heating bills were, to me, quite high. And it's just because we've generally been prolific energy wasters because our cost of energy in Canada has been historically fairly low. And so over time, what I realized is I needed to make my house more energy efficient. And it wasn't until 2017 that I embarked on that and did an energy retrofit to our house. And I reduced the amount of electrical need to run our geothermal by more than half. I think it's about 60% of the energy that we saved. So my geothermal unit used to only be able to heat the house to about minus 32. And then what would happen is there's an electrical backup unit in there, just purely resistive heating, and it would turn on. So if the outside air temperature was colder than minus 32, then it would start to use the supplemental electrical heat, which is expensive and doesn't have that 300% efficiency we talked about. But now, since I've done the energy retrofit to our house is so much more energy efficient. I can notice when the kids aren't at home. We used to have 5 people in our house. When those extra bodies aren't in the house, our house, takes a little bit more energy to heat. If we're not doing the cooking or our laundry and using the dryer, our house takes more energy to heat. So I find that right now it's been around 0 degrees here overnight and 1 or 2 in the day. We actually have a problem with our unit right now. This is the second thing I've got, is that the geothermal actually needs some maintenance right now. So we haven't even been able to use it. But our house now is so well insulated that it generally can maintain about a 20-degree difference with just our activities inside, cooking, doing laundry, and a couple warm bodies. So, and our house was a 1980 bungalow. So I'm suggesting that if we're going to go down this path of trying to make houses more affordable for people and reduce our emissions, the first place we should always start is reducing our impact and focusing on energy conservation, because that's usually the lowest cost change that can be made. Then the next step is replacing fossil energy with clean energy. And that's really what heat pumps are all about, because we're going to try and move away from oil in the Maritimes and some houses in Saskatchewan and natural gas towards electrification, which is generally going to be heat pumps and powered by clean energy sources of some type, so non-emitting sources.
What's the payback on your system? How long is it going to take?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, Garth, because like I mentioned early on, we were motivated by our safety risks because we had this carbon monoxide issue, and we were motivated to just get off fossil fuels. So from 2008 until about 2016, my mathematics showed that the payback would be very long because I was paying almost the same price as I would have been paying for natural gas. But something interesting happened. I mean, the price of natural gas fell from 2008 until probably about 2016 or 17. It seems like the prices just got lower. So everybody bugged me, actually. They said, yo, you made a stupid choice because gas is cheap. That's where the money is, or where the savings are. But pollution pricing it's that invisible hand of the market. This pollution pricing was introduced by right-leaning economists to try and correct this. And so as pollution prices apply more and more to gas, this is where our savings become more and more prominent. And once I made that energy retrofit on our house, our electrical needs went way down. So now I would say we're talking about a payback probably in the range of 10 to 20 years, which is still a long time for a lot of folks. And that's why I would say the first place to focus on is tightening up your house, keeping the heat in, reducing your impact. Because for me, the first stage of our energy retrofit actually only cost me about $6,000, but about 30% of our energy savings came right from that. And so the payback on that was just insulating our basement. We actually rented an excavator, dug all the way around the house, and then put 6 inches of styrofoam insulation and then backfilled it. So that was fairly cheap, but that payback, I would say, is in the order of 2 to 3 years.
Okay. I want to take a call. Matthew in Regina has been waiting, and he has some thoughts. Hi, Matthew.
Hi there. I just have some thoughts about some of the interesting applications I've had on applications of the technology of heat pumps I've found in the last couple years. I'm a power engineer by training, so my whole industry is around heating systems, cooling systems, buildings, industrial, and so on. So we talk about how to reduce our energy usage throughout our houses. And some of the easiest ways I've come across, you can actually purchase now either a heat pump hot water heater, which runs off normal household 120, or a heat pump dryer, which, even though it basically works the same way as a dehumidifier, but also runs off household 120, takes a little bit longer to dry your clothes, but far more energy efficient.
All right. Matthew, thanks for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
No, go.
Thanks,
I think we already
Matthew.
covered it as far as how it's about 3 times more efficient than just purely resistance heating.
Mm-hmm. Well, and obviously, as you pointed out, the technology is available for more than just home heating.
Garth, if I could chime
this
in.
Technology you
please.
can buy today.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Well, Matthew's right on the money here. And the Greener Homes grant right now that you can get is encouraging people to do just that, buy things like heat pump water heaters. And that's actually sort of the next on my to-do list. Once I get my heat pump for the furnace repaired and back up and running, I'm also going to go down the road of that heat pump water heater. But Matthew also mentioned a heat pump dryer. And interestingly enough, when we did our home retrofit, I said to my wife, there's no way I'm going to keep pumping hot air out of our house outside with a vented dryer. So we actually bought a heat pump dryer in 2019, and we've been using it ever since. So that's one of the other ways now that we try and save and conserve all of the energy that we use. So the energy that goes into drying our clothes is actually staying in our house, and we've closed off that vent to tighten up our house so we're not leaking out energy. And we've used it for 4 years, and I will say the one pitfall to these machines, though, is because you're keeping the air inside, they have to have a more complicated filtration system, because as you tumble the clothes around in the dryer, there's always bits of microfibers and microplastics coming off, and so you need to filter that out so it doesn't clog up the heat exchangers. So I did actually, for the first time in 4 years here, I just did some service on it. And I did it myself. I watched the YouTube video and took the dryer completely apart, and I had to vacuum out the lint that was in the heat exchanger and put it back together, and now it's working like a charm. But so 4 years, I suppose, if you have to do maintenance. I mean, we did have a family of 3 kids, and we went through a lot of laundry. So, but it does provide all that heat that you pay for stays in the house, and that's where you want it.
All right. Okay, we're going to take one more call, and then we're going to take a quick news break. And Glenn, if you can, I'd like you to stick around for the rest of the program, and feel free to jump in as I speak to some of our other guests. Can you hang around?
Yeah, you bet, Garth. Sure.
Oh, great. Thanks, Glenn. Okay, let's hear from Paul, north of Nipwood. I think it's Paul Emile. Hi, Paul.
Hello, Garth. Interesting program, as usual. We have 3 sources of heat to cover our backside in case one goes down, the other one will cut in, and then the other one. It's at our age, we felt that we needed this, so we've been burning wood for 45 years to heat our house. And wonderful. Depending on, you have to learn how to burn wood and what kind of wood, and et cetera, et cetera. And then 20 years ago, we decided that, as we get older, we need a backup in case we'd get sick or had to go someplace. So we put in the geothermal with the ground loops. Had a tune of about a little over $30,000. A little pricey, we thought, but then if it works as good as they say, it'll be worth it. So this is all fine. We used it when we needed it, but when it got really cold, we just the wood is there's no other comfortable heat like wood. And before anybody says yeah, you're polluting the air, well, wood is carbon neutral. Anyway, so the geothermal has been working fine. A couple of years ago, we had some problems. It wouldn't cut in. It wouldn't cut in. There's the big question. How many people are there? How many technicians are there, especially in the rural area? I don't want them to come from Saskatoon and charge me mileage both ways. That can repair the machine or find the glitch if it doesn't work. So a couple of years ago, when this was going on, it cost us close to $3,000 to have somebody come from Prince Albert who said that they knew what they were doing, and they did not. And finally, we found a person closer to us, coming out of Tisdale, that finally nailed the problem. And instead of us spending the $3,000, we could have maybe got away with, the $300 switch that was burnt out in the machine. Mm. So now we thought, well, if this happens again, that we have a problem with the machine, with the heat pump, we would still have a source of backup heat. So we're going to install an electric backup element that would keep the solution warm that circulates around the house. I would never have, for our climate, an air heat pump. The ground loop does the trick. It's working full time when it's minus 40. Like I say, then we make sure we go to wood because it's way easier, way warmer, way cozier. So the question is, how many technicians are out there that can install these machines properly and repair them when there's a problem and not have to wait several months for somebody to come out that knows what they're doing. Otherwise, it might cost us, $300 a year more for power, but that's also air conditioning, which is an excellent way to cool the house. And if you can afford to put out the original cost, it's worth it, especially if you're younger. I wouldn't do it now. At 75 years old, I wouldn't install solar panels and all that. Because it won't pay unless somebody takes over this farm from my family and they can benefit from it.
Okay. Paul, thanks so much for the call.
Okay, thanks, Garth.
Okay, back to today's conversation about heat pumps. And Glenn, I'll bring you in here one more time. You heard Paul Emile from North of Nipawin with some of the issues he had with finding, technicians that actually understand the technology. What's been your experience?
Well, it's funny that Paul mentions that. It's actually the same thing I'm going through right now. My heat pump is 15 years old, and just this year the trouble light came on and it stopped running. And basically what happened is the refrigerant started to leak out of it. And so I did call around to try to find a service tech. It took me a long time. And so there is somebody from Saskatoon who came out. But because I just tried to participate in the Greener Homes grant, I also wanted a quote to perhaps get a new one because it looks like their maintenance costs might be substantial. And so there's also a couple things I would recommend because my heat pump, when I bought it, perhaps it's because I'm an early adopter, it doesn't have a soft start on the compressor. So it cuts in really hard and kind of shakes the house. And because my contractor left and I installed it myself, I didn't put an isolation joint between the unit and the ducting. And so it makes a lot of noise in the house. And so there was a couple of reasons why I thought, technology's also improved a lot. Maybe I could get a more efficient unit. So I was trying to get some competitive quotes on it. But Paul's right. There's not a lot of people out there doing this. We're sort of in the early days. Not in the early days of the technology, I would say, because it is well developed. But it's the early days of people realizing what's available in Saskatchewan. Mm-hmm. And what's particularly troubling to me is one of the contractors I called came out and looked a very reputable place that you hear about, jingles on the advertising. They came out and looked and said, "Oh, we don't do geothermal." And then he tried to convince me to put in just an electric boiler and go to just purely resistive heating because he said these geothermal things don't work. So it's frustrating to me that these are our, the trusted professionals telling us that they don't work. And the other thing I would say about Paul's comment with air source heat pumps is If we can go back to focusing on tightening up your home and reducing your energy needs, then you have a much smaller need for heating. And the other thing I would say is air source heat pumps, if they work down to minus 25, we generally don't have that many days that are colder than minus 25. So the need to use that resistive supplemental heat, or to heat with wood, as Paul does, in a supplemental way, I think there's still a lot of options here that can certainly allow us to transition away from gas
Okay.
and oil heating.
Okay, I want to bring our next guest into the conversation. Brian Stockton puts his money where his mouth is. Brian is co-host of a Saskatchewan podcast with his friend James Whittingham. It's called The Clean Energy Show. He recently installed a heat pump in his Regina home, and he's on the line now. Brian, thanks for your time.
Yeah, glad to be here.
What made you want to install a heat pump?
Well, I just wanted to get rid of natural gas in our house. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I follow what's going on with the climate, and we just have to stop burning stuff like other people have said. So when we bought the house in 2006, we looked into putting geothermal in back then, and it was, quite expensive, quite complicated. So I just was kind of following the technology, and as air source heat pumps improved, I thought, okay, well, this is the way to go. And we never had air conditioning before. So, with the summers getting hotter and smokier, it seemed to make sense to go with a heat pump, and then we get air conditioning out of the deal as a bonus.
Now, we've heard from Glenn and others how they work in rural areas with the ground source heat pumps. How does it work in the city?
Yeah, it's just an air source unit, like I said, and I think it might be possible to put a ground source unit in, but it would be complicated, a lot more expensive. So, yeah, the air source unit, it's not going to be as efficient as a ground source heat pump, but, we've got solar panels on our roof to offset some of the electricity costs, not all of them, but, it seemed to make sense. The math made sense because we can get rid of our natural gas bill entirely and then just put that onto the electrical bill instead.
So your backup heating plan is electricity then, resistive heat?
Yeah, the heat pump's got a backup resistive heater. It's several thousand watts, and so it'll have no problem heating the house when it's minus 40, but, as Glenn said, it's just not very efficient. So, when it drops below minus 20, hopefully not for too long, because it will cost a lot, but I don't expect to freeze, and we've done lots of insulation upgrades on our house. We've put in new windows. The ceilings are all spray foamed, so I think it'll end up costing a little bit more than heating with natural gas, but hopefully not too much.
How hard was it to find someone to do the installation?
Yeah, that was tough. I really had to call around. There only seemed to be a couple places that I could find on the web that would even do it. This is still definitely a new thing here in Saskatchewan. They're definitely taking off in BC. They've been a thing in Atlantic Canada for a long time. But it does make sense that we would be, in Saskatchewan, it does get super cold here, so we're not going to probably adopt them as quickly as milder places. But, I managed to find somebody, and we've had it since the summer.
Okay. I want to take this call from James. I would imagine that Brian and Glenn, between you can probably handle it. James in Saskatoon, hello.
Hi, Garth. I've been looking into geotherm since the 70s. I haven't really put it in yet, but I was reading some articles. One was about community geotherm, where as subdivisions were built and the underground utilities for sewer and water were put in, they also put in geotherm. They also put in the lines and brought the services into the individual units when they brought the sewer and water in, so that there was a connection when the house was when the excavation was done for the house. This was all connected at the same time, and I'm just wondering if there's any push here. Also, in large construction, where you have pilings in. The Swiss have come up with a method where they put spiral tubing in the pilings and use the thermal mass from the pilings to provide their geotherm. I'll hang up and you can discuss that. Thank you.
All right. Glenn, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier that district heating is certainly an option. It just needs to have some commitment from municipal governments. And I think the other thing I would say is that our building codes need to be revised, not only to allow or remove red tape that might be surrounding that, but also to do what I talked about earlier, and that's building more energy efficient homes. Because again, priority one should always be reduce your impact and reduce the amount of energy you need.
All right, Glenn, thanks so much for taking time for us over your lunch hour. We're going to let you go now so we can bring in our next guest. And again, thanks so much for sharing your experience and your expertise.
Anytime, Garth.
Glenn Wright is a farmer near Vanscoy who has quite a bit of experience with a ground source heat pump. Brian, it's rude to ask, but how much did this project cost you?
Well, it's around $30,000, I would say. We are applying for the Greener Homes grant, so we should get $5,000 back from the federal government. I would say it's probably about $10,000 more than if we had to put in a conventional furnace and a conventional air conditioner. Mm-hmm. About $10,000 more than doing it, the conventional way. But, like I said, I just wanted to stop burning fossil fuels in my house. And, we talk about this stuff on the Clean Energy Show podcast, and I just thought I should, if we're going to talk the talk, we should walk the walk.
All right. Okay, I'm going to bring in our next guest now. We're going to head to Winnipeg, another place where they know about cold weather. Abhi Katamneni is a research manager with Efficiency Canada. He's on the line now. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me, Garth.
You've been listening to the program. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
Oh, man, good stuff. So I live in Manitoba. That makes us practically neighbors, right? So I have some understanding of the challenges that people face. I think what's interesting to me is a couple of things. One, I think what I'm hearing is that the technology itself is not the issue because it's been around for a long time. It works in a whole range of cold places. What might be a bit of a stumbling block is finding people who know how to do it right. And so in places like ours in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, because we are colder than perhaps some other parts of the country, we haven't had as many contractors incorporate heat pumps into their business practices and business models. So I think that might be a bit of the stumbling block. And I think it's interesting when we talk about repayment and return on investment and what the payback period is, right? So we don't usually think of this when we are talking about, let's say, putting new countertops or adding a new roof on your, or switching out the roof on your home, or even just getting a new furnace. So I think what heat pumps do is not only are they more efficient, not only are they more comfortable, but they can be tuned to meet the needs of your home. So traditional furnaces, what they do is they'll dump in a bunch of heat and they'll turn off. They'll dump in a bunch of heat and they'll turn off. But what heat pumps can do is just like your heater and air conditioner in your car, where you can kind of put in as much heat as you want when you want it. Heat pumps can regulate themselves to give you just as much as you heat that your home needs constantly through the day. So they are as a technology and as a product that you can put in your home. They can meet multiple needs in your home that goes beyond just cost savings and goes beyond reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They can make your home feel more comfortable if, like other guests were saying, you also combine that with some air sealing and insulation and make your home a little bit tighter.
What kind of appetite are you seeing for heat pumps?
What kind of appetite?
Yeah. I mean, are they catching on in Winnipeg?
I would say that in a urban environment like Winnipeg, it is a little bit more common because we have access to a lot more contractors who are willing to do this. And in some ways, heat pumps are very similar to an air conditioner, except they can run backwards, right? So from an installation perspective, when people are replacing an air conditioner, I think what we're seeing is it is increasingly becoming common for people to install a heat pump as well, because, hey, you get air conditioning in the summers, and as a bonus in the winter, you get heating. But pardon me, some of the challenges that I think that some of the folks out in more remote places have with regards to accessing contractors is might still be a problem here in other parts of Manitoba. But the good news is actually one of the other challenge in generally with heat pumps and replacing heat pumps and furnaces is that a vast majority of these replacements happen under an emergency situation, right? So on the coldest weeks of the year or the warmest week of the year, your air conditioner will break down. Coldest season, your family's home for Christmas break, your furnace will break down. So when that happens, what happens? Most people just want something quick, cheap, and done as fast as possible. And so what they will end up doing is a vast majority of people will just go with, okay, what box do I have in my home? I have a furnace. I just want the same thing. Come in, fix it as fast as possible because I've got kids crying. What they oftentimes people don't have the bandwidth to really think about like right sizing a heat pump, doing insulation and stuff in the home. And so I think that in part contributes to why maybe heat pumps are not seeing quite as many inroads in our homes, not just because of the technology and not just only because there might not be as many contractors, but it's also because of the purchasing decisions that homeowners take.
Got a question here from Tom who emailed. Tom's wondering if there's a heat pump option to replace a condominium-sized air conditioner.
So there are some new technologies for heat pumps that can heat and cool condos as well. And actually, like maybe Glenn could agree with me, is that in larger buildings, as you get larger and larger, there's only so much heat you can coax out of thin air, literally, which is what heat pumps do, is they grab heat from the outside, run into the home, and dump it on the inside. It's easier to extract heat when you want a large amount of heat from the ground, because underground, when you go below the surface of the earth, it stays at a relatively constant, 45-degree Fahrenheit or 50-degree Fahrenheit throughout the year, regardless of outside temperature. So it's easier to grab heat from inside the ground. So there are heat pump applications in multi-unit residential buildings and condominium buildings that are increasingly we're seeing them being deployed in many parts of the country.
Okay. What kind of incentives are available for people who want to make the transition?
So right now at the federal level, there is a Greener Homes program, which provides, I think, up to $5,000 to do, to do basically a home energy approach, right? So like Glenn was saying earlier, do it in the right order of things. So first make your home as tight as possible, and then install the right size equipment and a heat pump if possible. So there's up to $5,000 in federal grants and up to $40,000 in zero interest loans, I believe, that's available for all homeowners. And for people that heat with oil, there's a new program that's an extension of this program that gives, I think, an extra $10,000, and they give it upfront so that you don't have to pay upfront and then sit around like some of the other callers were saying and wait for that grant to come back to you. What is not available, and this is a challenge that we talk about a lot at Efficiency Canada, is that renters are not eligible for this program, and low-income households, they face uphill challenges because you have to pay for this upfront, and then you have to wait around months, who knows how long, for you to get some of that money back from the government. So what we've been advocating for is a kind of like a national approach to ensuring that everyone has access to, regardless of where they live, how old they are, how much money they have, whether they rent or own a home, is they have access to energy efficiency so that they can save money and live in a home that meet their needs.
I'm going to bring our next guest into the conversation here in just a moment, but what is the very best backup system then for when it does get very cold like it does here and in Winnipeg? What's the best sort of supplemental heat source?
The good news, Garth, is that a lot of these cold climate heat pumps, and this is specifically for cold places like ours, they come with their own what they call heat strips. And so when, like Glenn was saying earlier, another caller was saying earlier, when the temperature does go down, like 8 days of the year when it really, really hits, negative 20, negative 30, so the backup resistance kicks in. Another way to install heat pumps is that you don't have to go all in and just completely replace your furnace. Oftentimes what happens is one of the ways that you can install a heat pump is when your air conditioner breaks down, replace that with a cold climate heat pump. So you get cooling in the summer, and in the winters, the heat pump, you can set it in such a way that the heat pump does most of the work for most of the time. And during those cold winter days that we all get, when it dips really below zero, your existing backup furnace can kick in. And if you want to go completely off of gas, then that's fine too, because they come with their own cold climate heat pumps, come with their own heating strips, they call them, basically resistance heat that kicks in and gives it that little extra push to get it through the cold days.
Okay. Now, another person who was listening to the program Monday and called in to tell us about his experience with heat pumps is Jake Dingwall. Jake lives on an acreage east of Yorkton, and he joins us now for a few minutes. Hi, Jake.
Hi there, guys.
Jake, why did you want to get a heat pump?
Well, I guess in my situation, I didn't really have access to natural gas. Like when I bought the acreage back in 2008, it just had an oil burning furnace. And back then, the government had, I guess it was similar to the greener homes, so I had replaced the windows, we insulated the basement, but it was kind of upgraded to another oil furnace, like a 83% efficiency one. And then with the greener homes coming up now, my furnace has been giving me some problems the last couple of years, and the cost of the oil was getting higher and higher. Like I think last year, my total bill for the oil was around $3,500. So I kind of figured I should just bite the bullet and spend the money, and I put in a geothermal unit.
So you've gone geothermal then?
Yes, a good ground source.
What kind of incentives were available for you to make this move at the time, or were there any?
It was just through the Greener Homes program. So I'd heard about that, and I applied and was accepted. So that was about it. And then, like I said, the price of heating oil had gone up quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 years. So, like, to heat my house was costing me over $3,000 for the winter. So, like, with the loan program that I got from the government, like, my payments are going to basically be what I was paying in oil. So, it's interest-free for 10 years. So, I figured, why not?
How much does it cost to run the heat pump?
I don't know that quite yet. So, I've been kind of watching my meter, and I haven't seen a big increase yet. Like, I have a hot water tank hooked up to the unit as well. So, I'm thinking of saving myself a little bit with the hot water heater, maybe offsetting the price of the heat pump running type of thing.
Was it hard to find someone to do the installation?
In my area, there was one close by. It wasn't so far to get somebody to do the installation, but I did vertical holes, like vertical drilling. Mm-hmm. And to get a driller out, I had to wait almost a year and a couple of months. Yeah, it's probably about 14 months before I could get somebody actually out to my yard site and drill the holes. So that was probably the longest wait, was actually finding somebody to come out in this area to drill.
What else have you done to make the home more energy efficient, Jake?
I changed the windows and the doors, insulated the basement with spray foam. Crawl spaces are all insulated with the spray foam. So I guess as far as being airtight and insulated, the house was done before I put in the geothermal units. So I'm hoping it works well.
So do you have a backup source for when we do get those minus 30, 40 degree nights?
Well, the furnace itself, like the unit that I installed, has like an electric backup built into it. So, I'm hoping that's enough. Like I said, it's my first winter going in with it this winter, so I'm just hoping it's all good.
All right, Jake, thanks for sharing that experience with us. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's go to Al near Kenora. Hi, Al.
Hello.
Hi, Al. Go ahead.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I had to call in. I'm really pleased to hear that there's other people that have been using a heat pump. We installed our heat pump in 1997, and it's been working fine ever since. We're heating a house that's about 2,200 square feet, and it's been working. So when I hear people say it can't work in Saskatchewan, I go like, wow, we're not cold.
Now, is yours an air source or a ground source?
No, it's a ground source heat pump, and we live on a farm, so we didn't have to deal with the drilling the ground source in. We just used the backhoe, which was readily available, and we installed piping just out front of our front yard into the field.
Okay, now,
the piping.
Yeah, Al, well, we're quickly running out of time, and I want to get to kind of the core here. You were obviously an early adopter. Have you any regrets?
No. We were, at the time we were installing it, we didn't have anybody around. We kind of were running out of people that would, or some people would say they know how to do this thing, and then I would know more about it because I was in touch with people in Ontario that were designing heat pumps. And no, I don't have any regret having installed it. Our cost, of course, was not that high. We were doing it when we were building a house. So our system cost, the system including in-floor heating, all the piping and installation for the in-floor heating, because we use our heat pump to heat a water system instead, like it's just a water exchanger, and we have in-floor heating. That cost $18,000. The ground loop was about $2,200 additional to it. So the total system cost us just over $20,000. And it's been working really well. I was told at the time we were building it that we could expect like 25 years out of the compressor system. I'm noticing that we're just about there. So I'm glad to hear that there are some incentives for replacements, because at the time we did it, there were no incentives of any kind. As a matter of fact, there were roadblocks thrown up because the insurance company didn't know how to deal with this and all this kind of stuff.
Okay. Al, I got to let you go. Thanks so much for the call.
Okay. Thank you very much for the program. I really enjoyed it.
Now, Abby, we're nearly out of time, and I kind of want to get to the core of things with you, too. What's the best argument for a heat pump, and especially in the cities?
Yeah, my best argument would be that heat pumps can help you get most out of your home, right? Garth, we spend 90% of our time indoors, like more than any generation before us. And especially nowadays with most people being working from home and kids staying at home and stuff like that, your comfort and well-being in your home have a profound impact on your physical and mental health. And so think of this as an investment in yourself and your family and in your home, and then start from there and work backwards, right? Get an energy audit, look at what your home needs to improve. Like, do you need a little bit more insulation, air sealing, make the home tighter, use less money to keep your home warmer in the winters and colder in the summers. And then once you get past those stages, take a look around and see what technologies are available to help you get there. What heat pumps can do that other conventional heating sources or cooling sources can't do is give you both heating and cooling and do it efficiently at cheaper cost. And so we can get hung up about, now I can show you numbers that'll show you that heat pumps, especially when used in conjunction with like a backup natural gas, are cheaper than just using straight up natural gas. But even look past the numbers, right? And start thinking about like the investment that you make in your home and in your family, and using heat pumps and insulation, air sealing as a tool to get to where you want to be with your home.
Abby, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Garth.